In this video, we're going to look at viewer encounters with wildmen in northern Canada and Alaska. The colloquial term for wildmen up north is Bushman or Brushman, or the hairy man, and one of the old Dene or Athabascan native words is the Nakani. So let's jump right in. First comments from Appa32472 5 years ago. I was up in that area a long time ago in the 70s, right around Misty River, just south of Wrigley Creek, about 3 miles south of it with my dad and uncle. I was only around 16, but I know exactly what they speak of. We saw 2 of them creatures, no bull. To me, they looked like the Patterson-Gimlin Bigfoot film. One, which was the male, no doubt about that, stood 12 feet tall. I know, 'cause Dad went back to the tree it was next to and measured its height. The other was only about 8 feet, with breasts. He was only about 200 yards away, and could see them pretty good with the binoculars we had. Both had dark reddish-brown hair over the entire body. They didn't see us, but they smelled us. They have a terrific sense of smell. Well, they moved off down the creek. We only saw them for like 2 or 3 minutes, but the male was a giant, and I mean giant. The bush people up there called them Nakani. I'm hoping to go back this year if the corona stuff goes away. Next comments, Fred Roll, 7812, 4 years ago. I grew up in Bush, Alaska, and seen plenty of high strangeness. Some of my earliest memories are of my aunt calling us inside the cabin after receiving a call from the neighbor warning us of the hairy man being spotted and to get us kids somewhere safe. We would sit in the middle of the room as far from the windows as possible and be very quiet, terrified it would look through the window at us and growl/howl at us. My auntie had the biggest balls ever. One time she was yelling at it and shooting the shotgun with slugs and buckshot through one of the windows it broke, trying to grab my sister Beverly. That time it was the middle of a rainy day, and that's why we were all inside, and out of nowhere this huge hairy arm came through the window so fast and grabbed her by the arm. She went limp trying to stop it from pulling her out, and split seconds passed and my auntie was banging shots and working the pump on that shotgun point-blank range, and it screamed so loud before running off it shook the dishes on the shelves from the vibration created. My auntie was a great woman who watched us all every summer and fall when all the adults were commercial fishing and hunting into the fall season. Living and growing up there was some of the greatest memories and some of the worst in my life. That's an intense story. Just a quick comment post-production. The detail of it trying to grab the little girl is very interesting because in literally almost all of the Nakani stories, the Nakani traditions from the Dene, different Dene tribes, all say that the Nakani tries to steal women and girls for wives. So this story is like perfectly congruent with the old Dene Nakani stories. Next comments, BCKX5ZB, 5 years ago. I spent 2 weeks on Great Slave Lake for a fishing trip, in and out of Lutselke, I probably pronounced that wrong, and heard many stories from locals and guides, especially about the Nukluk, and how a group of youngsters used to come up to the lodge I was staying at, would raid the garbage bins at night for food. Also, if you were off fishing, they would steal items/food from your campsite if left unattended. But up around Lutselke, you hear more about their Nessie, or lake monster. I love stories and documentaries like this. Always been fascinated by cryptids and the paranormal. Seen lots of wildlife, and had a few strange encounters, but never really seen anything out of the ordinary. So it's funny he mentioned Nukluk. That's a word that Frank Graves, long story, but I did a documentary way back in 2018. I tracked down and interviewed a guy named Frank Graves, who, when he was a young man, I want to say like late teens or early 20s, he and a group of university students went on a expedition to the South Nakani River for various different purposes. A lot of it was to collect botanical specimens or like birds, animal specimens. But Frank had gone there because he had hooked up with Ivan T. Sanderson, who people call the godfather of cryptozoology, and he was kind of going on Sanderson's behalf, trying to get information about Bigfoot, what Sanderson called abominable snowmen. And he wrote a letter after his trip. He wrote a letter to Sanderson saying that he'd interviewed locals up there and they talked about something called the Nukluk, which he described as sort of a short, almost Neanderthal-looking thing, different from a Sasquatch is what he said, carrying a club and wearing primitive clothing. And it was seen at Fort Liard, Honey Butte, and Fort Simpson, I think, kind of along the Liard River. And when I interviewed Frank, he had a different, this is like, it would have been like more than 50 years after the experience. He misremembered the name as Tokluk, but he told me something interesting that he didn't say in his letter to Sanderson. He said that they were supposed to live at a place called the Twin Buttes, which I guess is a mountain, a fairly remote mountain. But the natives said that they lived there. Kind of these Neanderthal things. So it's interesting that this guy is saying Nukluk, because that accords with Frank's original word that he got from the locals there, the local Dene, Slavey Dene Indians. Next comment's, damn it, another name 4 years ago. My great-grandmother remembered a birthday around the time of the centennial in Alaska. That means she was around 4 or 5 in 1876. She died in the 1970s, over 100 years old. She grew up in a village, on the edge of the wilderness of Alaska. Much of our culture was still intact when she grew up. She said Bigfoot was real, and could be around when you're not looking for it, but it can disappear when you search for it. Like a ghost, or like an interdimensional being. Natives actually do have concepts like that, but we use different words. In the lower 48, there's a tribe that was offered to go home with the Bigfoot tribe, because the white man was coming and would ruin everything. Their home wasn't on this planet, but another one nearby, another dimension. We're not the only ones that use this planet. Next comment's Trevor Miles, 5852, 4 years ago. I will not say where, other than to say it's the northern lands. I was with my older brother playing at the river once. All the chores had been done on a summer day. We took our bath in a pool of bend of small river, big stream. While we were getting dressed, my brother said, "Put your shoes on." Being typical small brother, I told him, "I know how to dress myself." Then I told him, "Hey, did you hear that?" Then again he said, "Put your shoes on and get on the dry gravel." "No, wait," I said. "Did you hear that?" "Shut up, put your shoes on, and when I say run, run all the way home, and do not look back. Follow my steps so you don't have to fight the tall grass." I put my shoes on and was about to ask him again when he yelled, "Run." He took off and I watched him run. I started walking, then I heard a rustle in the trees louder and firmer. I could hear my brother yelling, and by then my spine tingled and knew something was wrong. I ran after my brother and got about 20 feet of him, and he kept motioning me not to look back and run. I looked back and I could see a trail of fallen grass behind us. Then on a hill I saw another trail next to ours, and the grass was falling as it got closer. I ran and could feel the heaviness of footsteps on the ground like you'd hear and feel on a wooden floor. I saw my brother go under the barbed wires and look at me. This time he did not say run. He did not have to. I went through the fence and scratched my back on barbed wire. Another 50 yards we made it to the house, and he slammed the door behind me. I looked back to see about 30 feet of the fence, about 7 poles all go down towards the house. My brother got the rifle Mauser and put large bullets in it. A few hours later, parents came home, and my brother told them the story before I could even say a word. At that time, we used kerosene lamps, and we left them on full flame all night. My dad told me I did good in listening to my brother. He lied. My dad told us if he wanted us, he could have overtaken us. There was a distinct smell that I felt and smelled while running. Not going to say it was sulfur, but it was tangy, like grapefruit. Many years later, like 20 plus, when I was living in New York, I smelled that familiar scent again. I'm 6'1", but one person walked past me, maybe 2 heads taller than me. Did not see his face, but saw him sail through the crowd like nothing was in front of him. Nothing had to be said. I felt like it was a message that I had not forgotten. And not in a good way, but not in a hurtful way either. To this day, I own a dog. Kids back then told me when I was back in school that they heard I had been chased by a Wendigo. For years, farm kids are not allowed to go back to that part of forest. I asked my dad, and he said, "Why put names to something you do not want to call or see again?" I have told this story once before, hoping somebody had a similar experience. I wonder if ants feel they control their world just like we feel we control ours, and just as oblivious to the larger world we play a small part in. So kids told him that he was chased by a Wendigo, or Wendigo, which in most, that's kind of like a Cree, Ojibwe, Anishinaabe tradition, which, in some stories it is a monster, like a giant skeletal human. And in other traditions it's a kind of an evil spirit that will possess people and make them have an insatiable appetite for human flesh. And then sometimes the people who are possessed by that spirit transform into the giant monster. That's the old Cree and Algonquian tradition, which is different across different tribes. Next comment's Joe in Alaska 2 years ago. Thank you for the video, and I thank the man you interviewed. And then he's talking about Frank Graves. Or he could be talking about a guy I met in the Great Sandhills. I did another video with a guy I met, totally by chance. That was so strange. I was getting footage in the Great Sandhills in Saskatchewan, and started talking to a guy, and ended up talking about my channel, and he's like, oh, I saw a Sasquatch in the 60s, close to Harrison Hot Springs. And so he told me that story, and I got it on camera. It was pretty cool. Anyway, let's go back to Joe in Alaska. I've seen 2 Sasquatch here in Alaska. 2017, a friend and I had a Sasquatch blatantly walk in front of my pickup. 2022, I was less than a half mile from the first encounter area, and I saw another. This one was massive, 12 feet tall and very wide. It was black and standing partially behind a spruce tree. I was startled and automatically said, "Hey, big brother," and raised my right hand. I turned and walked away, not looking back at a fairly brisk walk. My encounters were quick and uneventful. However, it was strange looking at a Sasquatch person who isn't supposed to exist. It took some time before my mind would accept it. Take care and thank you again, Joe. So both of these people are saying, Joe in Alaska and the earlier commenter, Appa32472, say that the Sasquatch they saw was 12 feet tall, which is really tall, much taller than the stories from British Columbia generally. Before we continue, I wanted to let you know that my new documentary on the mysteries of Pitt Lake, British Columbia, is now available to members of my channel. If you'd like to become a channel member so that you can watch the documentary, please click the join button beside my channel name and follow the prompts. Membership costs $1 Canadian per month and allows you to watch all my new videos ad-free. You can find a link to the documentary in the video description. Next comment, straight Canadian 2 years ago. We live in a rural area 60 kilometers from a small town in northern Canada. My wife's panties kept going missing off our clothesline, so one day I went looking for the thief. I walked down the path through the forest to the creek, and there he was, a huge male Bigfoot with my wife's panties wrapped around his head. He must have heard me coming because he pulled the panties to one side of his face and stared at me in bewilderment. I said, "Hey man." His look turned to embarrassment. Next thing I know, he took off into the woods making gorilla noises. I was like, WTF. I can't tell if this is a joke or not, because there are lots of stories up north, especially up north, of Sasquatch wearing clothing that they found. Lots of the Nakani stories are like that. Next comment, Stefan Schleps, 8758, 3 years ago. He's a long-time, very kind commenter. As always, your tales are greatly appreciated and thoroughly enjoyed. I'm suddenly reminded of a tale I heard about through the mainstream media, and perhaps read as well in the Washington Post. It may be 2 different tales I have, over the years, blended together due to old age, into a single story. Whatever the case, the gist of it is that at either a military base or the Great Alaskan Oil Pipeline had reported something had damaged the pipeline, and or a power cable running along its length, or this happened to said power cable, electric line in an Air Force base in the Alaskan interior. As they repaired it, a security camera was installed due to strange evidence at the site. Subsequently, a man-like creature appeared to further wreak havoc on the site and the equipment a second time. Only this time he was caught on camera. I think this was in the late 80s or early 90s. Wish I could recall more. All the best to you. Next comment, Sean J. 1679, 1 year ago. I am half Athabascan Indian from a village called Chitina on the Copper River Valley, about 250 miles drive out into the Alaskan wilderness from Anchorage. My people call it Koleni, or Bush Indians. The mother of my child, a white woman, and I had an encounter with one on the Copper River about 27 to 28 years ago. I never believed my grandma's, she grew up in Chitina, and elder stories about Bush Indians until that night. Interesting. So the Copper River is, like he said, in Alaska, and I think it's the traditional home of the Otna Indians, who have a very interesting story, a very interesting tradition about, they called them the tailed ones. And I want to say their name or word for it was something like Tseteni or Chiteni or something like that. And the way they were described is kind of like very vicious, aggressive, carnivorous monkeys. And the legend is that they used to live in these a certain place with like a certain rock with caves in it, and they used to live in the caves. And one day they were so sick of these monkeys predating on them and killing them and eating them, they would eat people, that they built a fire and smoked them out. I've done a video on that called Devil Monkeys. I'll link to it in the description. But it sounds like the Copper River natives have another tradition about the Koleni or Bush Indians, which sounds a lot more like Sasquatch. Next comments, Larry Wood, 1006, 1 year ago. I'm a 70-year-old Alaskan. In King Salmon or Dillingham in the early 1980s, there were several super cubs damaged by what was thought as a grizz, but this was in January, Too late and too early for any bear to be out. Further, the tracks to the tree line were not bare, and no one wanted to go to the tree line to investigate. The tracks were very large and human-like. Channel 2 News and others in the state carried the story. The owners of the damaged aircraft were more than a little concerned over what had damaged their airplanes. Interesting, I bet there's articles about that. Next comments Ronan's Cobra 1 year ago. I worked deep in the mountains north of the Nakani headwaters and seen a tall black figure walking along the top of a mountain above me. Witnessed by a coworker as well. Told a supervisor that he had seen one from a helicopter and looked disturbed thinking about it. Now that's interesting because a lot of legends say that the Nahani is home to Nakani, and I think even the word Nahani has some sort of etymological relationship to Nakani. I remember trying to figure out where it came from, and the consensus, not the consensus, there's actually a lot of different ideas on where the word Nahani comes from. It's a very wide word, but it means, in some traditions, the enemy over there. So a lot of tribes would call a neighboring kind of enemy tribe or unfamiliar tribe, they'd call them Nahani. But according to a linguist that I talked to, the Dene linguist, I think that's what my source was. It's been a long time since I did research. 2017 was when I did research on the Nahani for my book, Legends of the Nahani Valley. But I think the linguist was saying that Nahani, according to some Slavey traditions, was an ancient race of giant people who were kind of they were just people, but they transformed into these monstrous giants because of some horrible things they did, like unnatural practices, maybe incest or something, I can't quite remember. But like as a punishment for their unnatural lifestyle, they were transformed into these giant monsters. And they were supposed to live in the mountains. That's why, that's the purpose of this tangent. They were supposed to live in the mountains. Next comments, the Scallywag, 1776, 2 months ago. I heard one in Alaska while hiking. I was alone in the woods. I had just found the trail again after losing it, and being lost for an hour when a woman's voice called out and said, "Where are you going?" It wasn't a random noise. It was a voice. Felt like something was breathing down my neck the whole way back. I was alone in the woods. The trail was 25 miles from the nearest town, and when I made it back to the small gravel parking lot, the quad I took to get there was still the only vehicle there. One Duck Trail, Prince of Wales, Alaska. Wow, that's a spooky story. And that's another story I've heard from, I interviewed a guy, really interesting guy. His name was Anthony Roche. I think he was part Mi'kmaq and part Inuit, and he lived up north, and he says he's lived in the northern bush his whole life. And he has all sorts of interesting stories. I should get in touch with him again. I want to see if I can get more stories from him because they're so interesting. And there's some that I haven't told before. Well, one of them, which I included in my book, Legends of the Nahani Valley, was that he and some people were working for the Parks Canada. They were doing work in the Nahani Valley in the South Nahani River. This is on like the border of the Northwest Territory and Alaska. And they were up above Virginia Falls. That's like, there's a huge waterfall there called Virginia Falls. They were up above it, I think. Maybe near the Rabbit Kettle Hot Springs. And I remember him saying he heard a weird noise in the bush. It sounded like a person imitating a raven. And he says, I know what a raven sounds like. Like, I'm very familiar with what a raven sounds like. And I know what a person trying to imitate a raven sounds like because me and my brothers would try to do that. And he says, that's exactly what it was. And he's sitting next to an older guy. And he looks at him kind of for an explanation. And the older guy says, oh, don't worry. He's just letting us know he's there. Which I thought was a pretty horrifying explanation. Oh, and that's it. That's the end of it. Sorry, this was too short, but interesting stories, I thought. All right, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.